Okay.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Thanks for doing that. All
All
right. So
right.
I'll reintroduce myself. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. We really appreciate it. My name is Tate Anzalone. I'm an enrolled agent with the IRS, and I'm also the member experience manager at Stride for our tax product, Stride Tax. And we're joined by Harry, better known as the Rideshare guy, who's just joined the broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Would you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. And thanks for having me. I know we had a couple technical difficulties, but hopefully the sound is coming through loud and clear right now, and everyone can hear and listen. So my name is Harry. I run a blog called The Rideshare Guy and a podcast and a YouTube channel that is focused on helping rideshare drivers, so Uber and Lyft drivers and other workers in the gig economy with everything from getting signed up and started to making more money. And, that's kind of who I am and what I do.
All right, thank you so much. Well, we're really excited for you to join us today. You're definitely pretty popular among Stride members who are rideshare drivers, which is a huge percentage of our member base. So I know they're really excited to be hearing from you today. So before we jump in and talk about the top 10 things that I know every rideshare driver is wondering, I would love for everybody on the broadcast to like it and share it with all of your rideshare friends so that they can see these tips and then hopefully feel prepared to be a rideshare driver this year.
Cool. Yeah, it looks like Chris says we're sounding good, so I'm going to take
Great.
his word for it.
All right, shout out to Chris. Thank you for confirming that we sound great. So as I mentioned earlier today, we're going to talk about the top 10 things that every rideshare driver should know heading into 2019. So to start us off, as a rideshare driver, if you're going to invest in passenger goodies, so anything you're buying for your passengers, which ones should you definitely put money in?
Yeah, so I think that this answer has actually changed a lot over the years. When I first signed up to drive with Uber and Lyft almost 5 years ago, I think that, people were investing in water bottles and goodies and snacks and things like that for their passengers. So you might see articles or videos out there that recommend that. But these days, I'm not a big fan of investing in water bottles and snacks and goodies because there isn't a great return on your investment for drivers. I prefer things that are like charging cables or sort of items that provide value to your passengers on an ongoing basis. So that might be like charging cables. I think that's pretty basic. Some drivers, if they don't mind their passengers playing music, aux cables might work. And then I do keep a couple bottles of water hidden away so that if I ever have that passenger who's like really like, hey, I'm dying of thirst, do you have a water bottle or something like that? Then now you're like providing it to someone and they might actually get value out of it. They might leave you a tip, a better rating, whatever it might be. When you're just sort of offering it though to anyone and everyone, I feel like riders tend not to appreciate it, and it just cuts into your earnings.
Yeah, I see that. You can be kind of a nice, pleasant surprise for your passengers, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for going through those. So I wanted to remind everybody listening to Harry's answers that anything that you purchase for your rideshare business is likely deductible on your taxes. So if you're purchasing something for your rideshare business, for your passengers, for yourself, if it's considered both ordinary for your industry and necessary to do your job well, then you should definitely track those expenses so that you can deduct them on your tax return later. So the water bottles Harry mentioned are definitely deductible as well as the aux cords that you mentioned.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think that when you start getting in the habit of tracking those items, you start to realize, wow, there's like a lot that's potentially deductible, and that stuff all adds up at the end of the year. So it's nice.
Yeah, definitely. On the subject of deductions, would you mind taking us through what would you consider maybe the top 5 deductions that rideshare drivers should definitely be tracking?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that kind of the number one and most obvious one, or maybe not obvious, but I think that the number one for me is definitely mileage, since drivers are putting so many miles on their car. They can opt for the standard mileage deduction or the actual expense method, which you probably know a lot more than I do about. And obviously Stride, the tax app, is a great option to track those miles. And I know that there's a bunch of options there. But really what it comes down to is that, since you're putting, believe it or not, who would have thought a rideshare driver would put a ton of miles on their car? But, a full-time driver might easily put 1,000 miles a week on their car, maybe even up to 1,500 in a really big or busy city. And at the end of the year, you can potentially offset a lot of your rideshare income if you did a good job tracking all your mileage. So to me, that's sort of a number one. And, there's great tools like Stride that will do it for you. But I think in general, like you really, whatever method you use, do something, because that's, if you were only to do one thing tax-wise, I would recommend tracking your mileage just as far as deductions.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely great advice. And I'll definitely confirm for everybody out there that your mileage when you're working, if you have mileage that you incur for a work-related reason, then you should definitely track it because it'll end up being deductible at a rate of 58 cents per mile in 2019. And if you're going back through your records for 2018, the rate is 54.5 cents per mile.
Yeah, so it's going up, which I think is a good thing. And the nice thing for drivers is, we've got a couple articles on our site that actually go in and kind of calculate the cost of operating your vehicle. And the nice thing is that, the actual cost to operate your vehicle can be significantly less. So it's sort of like a nice little tax. I wouldn't call it a loophole, but it's like a nice tax benefit for drivers because, their actual car doesn't cost nearly that much, or, potentially wouldn't cost that much if they're driving a really fuel efficient car or something that gets good gas mileage.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I mean, the standard mileage rate is based off of the average vehicle costs for a given year, or the projected average vehicle cost. So if you have a car that is less expensive than the average to maintain, then you're definitely getting more money back on your taxes by taking the standard mileage rate than you would if you just deducted a percentage of all of your vehicle expenses directly. So you definitely do get some of the money back, I think. Can you talk to me about how you deduct your cell phone purchase or your cell phone bill?
Yeah, definitely. So that's another good one. I think after mileage, of course, cell phone is pretty important. And I know that, sort of for a lot of drivers, depending on the percentage that you use it for personal versus business, you can actually deduct the cost of your cell phone. And, cell phones are pretty expensive, especially if you're on a plan. So, I mean, I think that the actual cell phone purchase, and then, of course, like your monthly ongoing service is another big deduction there.
Yeah, definitely. I know a question that we get fairly often about the cell phone bill is how in the world do you figure out what percentage of your bill is deductible? Would you mind walking us through how you go about that process?
Sure. I'll walk you through how I go about it, and you can tell me if I do it right or not. But, typically I kind of just estimate what percentage of the time I'm using it for business. So, like iPhone, for example, you can actually go and see how often you're using it, using your phone, for example, on a weekly basis. And then you can also, on driving for Uber, you can see your online hours. So if I'm online with Uber, obviously my phone is on and I'm working on it. Let's say in a single week, it might be 10 hours. And if I'm spending only 1 or 2 hours on my phone outside of that, then like 80–90% of that is going to be for business use. So I know that there's a few different ways you can do it, but usually it ends up being a pretty nice percentage that you can deduct for business.
Yeah, you're doing it exactly right. Exactly as we mentioned, Stride members do it as well. You're definitely right. Looking through a percentage of your calls, texts, and data usage, seeing which percentage of your data is used on work-related apps is a really good way to go about it. So those are some good tips to see your online time with Uber. I'll definitely make sure our members hear about that. And I know that just as a heads up to everybody, I'm looking at the list of the top deductions that we see from our rideshare drivers are mileage, exactly as you mentioned, the cell phone, passenger goodies, and then parking fees, tolls, and then music and related apps. So Spotify Premium, etc. Do those resonate with what you feel like you're spending money on for your business?
Yeah, definitely. And it can get a little tricky because, for example, when you're on a ride, tolls, for example, Uber will charge the passenger for the tolls and you might get reimbursed that way. But there may be parking fees or tolls outside of that that Uber is reimbursing you for that you would be able to deduct. And then the other thing too is anything that you're purchasing or investing in your business, training materials. Like I always tell people, that there's apps like Maestro, my book, my training course, things like that. If you're purchasing, training materials or anything related for your business, those can potentially be deductible too.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'll also add that if you're incurring expenses for software to file your taxes and it ends up being more expensive than it would have been if you were paying for a tax filing software that didn't include business income. That is also a deduction that you can keep track of on the software side.
Yeah, so a lot of potential deductions.
Yeah, definitely. So on the subject of deductions again, how would you recommend staying organized and keeping track of your deductions throughout the year so that when you file your taxes, you're ready and you have everything in front of you?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that definitely, what I said earlier applies is like you want to do something, whatever the system is, like have something, whether it's like a spreadsheet, a notebook, you're saving all your receipts in your email. But I think that, with technology these days, there are a lot of apps out there like Stride, for example, of course, that makes these things way easier. And not to keep plugging Stride, but obviously I've been a user for 5 years and it's a free app download. for drivers, and obviously does the mileage tracking. And of course, I know you guys have a lot of stuff on the expense side, and even, kind of recommend which expenses are deductible and which aren't. So it sort of helps you. So, I guess what I would say is I think the best way is to use an app like Stride, since come end of the year, if you're filing your taxes, all that info will either be there, or, if you use a CPA, you can just kind of send it to them and let them figure it out.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think a benefit of using an app versus using some kind of, expense book is that it's safe and secure. So if you ever lose your phone or lose some kind of logbook, we have all of the information saved to our servers, so we can always, get you the information you've been working on for a year or more.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I also, I'll echo the fact that when you sign up for Stride Tax, you get to choose your job. And for anyone out there who may be struggling with figuring out what is deductible and what's not for your industry, you can choose your job in Stride Tax, and they'll recommend a list of expenses that we know are deductible for your industry. So hopefully some rideshare drivers out there.
And one other deduction that I'll mention too, that I think always is kind of cool and stands out. It's more of an example, really, to kind of, like I said, once you start thinking about deductions, you can really you'll realize that, wow, a lot of stuff is deductible. And kind of the example that I like to give is I like to travel a lot. And I bought a GoPro so that when I travel, I can take little videos and stuff like that. But I also use that GoPro in my car sometimes as a dash cam. So 90% of the time I'm using the GoPro as a dash cam, as part of my business. But 10% of the time I'm using it personally, for travel and stuff like that. So I get to deduct 90% of the cost of the GoPro, but but I sort of, even though I use it, kind of traveling and all that, which, so that's sort of what I try to look for in deductions.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It sounds like you're doing a really thorough job of figuring out which of your assets are used for business and which ones are for personal reasons, or both. And for everybody listening, I would definitely recommend doing exactly as Harry's doing, and keep track of what percentage of the time you're using any of your assets for business versus personal reasons. So if it's all right, I'd love to get into some of the tactical stuff about rideshare driving. So what would you say would be the best time of day to start driving, or best time of week?
For new drivers, or?
How about for anyone?
For anyone. Yeah, I think that, what I typically tell people is that, if you're really trying to maximize your earnings, kind of the most obvious place to start, Friday, Saturday night, we call them the party hours for a reason, because everyone's out drinking. And that's when you're going to see, we always see the highest demand Friday, Saturday nights. But there could be a big supply of drivers. So you don't always know that side of it. But, that's typically when we see the surge pricing or the prime time. So Friday, Saturday nights are sort of the starting point if you're getting into it and you're trying to find the times that are busy. The other times that are very busy are commuting hours. So Monday through Friday, mornings and afternoons, when people are going to and from work. Now, the big challenge that you have there is traffic. So you kind of have to balance that. And if you absolutely hate sitting in traffic, those times may not be the best for you. And then kind of the last thing that I would say when it comes to, when and where you should drive and really thinking about how to maximize your earnings is sort of the big events, the holidays, the special parties, the conferences, the sporting events, things like that. And, there's a lot of strategy that, for example, in my book, I talk about how to handle sporting events, because you don't want to just show up at the end of a game and sit there with a million drivers in traffic. But there's definitely some strategies you can use. But that's typically what you're going to want to look for, is those really busy times, because that's when you're going to see the surge pricing and the prime time.
Yeah, that's really good advice to stay updated in your area on when the big events are happening, I'm sure. We have a report from Gridwise here that we've looked at, and it says that driving near airports for the evening events that you mentioned and then in the suburbs is fairly profitable. Would you agree? Is that what you found?
Yeah, I think I saw the report from Gridwise, and I think they surveyed their users and asked them, where they're finding the most profitable trips. And I think airports came out at the top. And personally, I haven't found airports to be the most profitable rides, but there are definitely times and places where they make a lot of sense. So when you think about it, early AM airport rides are always a strategy. This is a strategy kind of that I tell a lot of people to try, because from about 3 or 4 a.m. all the way up to 6 or 7 a.m., there's really no one on the roads. And the only reason that passengers could possibly be requesting rides in most places, because it's after the bar hours and it's before people are going to work, is to go to the airport. And so you have a lot of people going to the airport at these times. There's no traffic. And there aren't a ton of requests coming in, but there also aren't a lot of drivers out at that time. So that's when you start to get into the more advanced tactics. You think about, okay, when are passengers requesting rides, but also when are not that many drivers out on the road. So I think airports can be a profitable strategy.
Okay, thank you everybody for bearing with us. We're just adding Harry in now so that we can get back to talking about some of your top rideshare questions. Okay. Hey, Harry. Can you hear us?
Hey, Tay.
Hey, thanks so much for bearing with us through the technical difficulties. I think we're all set to keep talking. So
No
where were
worries.
we? I think we were talking about your strategy for catching the early morning airport rides. Would you mind picking up there?
Yeah, sure. So I think that in general, it's nice when you start looking at things from kind of both the supply and demand side. So obviously, I think a lot of drivers tend to think about, okay, when are there a ton of passengers out? But when the early morning airport rides, for example, you're sort of thinking about the other side, like when are there not a lot of other drivers out, right? Because even though there may not be a ton of requests coming in, if you're the only driver out, it doesn't matter if there's 5 requests or 50 requests, you're going to get all of them. So that's kind of one strategy you can take advantage of.
Yeah, definitely. That's really helpful to know. Thank you. So it seems like you've done a lot of thinking on how to get the biggest bang for your buck, or how to maximize your profit per hour that you're spending on rideshare driving. I'm wondering if you have an opinion on if it's best to work for just one rideshare service, or if you should be working for all of the ones that are available in your area.
Yeah, well, I think you said it right. I do care a lot about maximizing profits. That's the name of my video course, Maximum Rideshare and Profits.
Yeah.
But I think definitely, what I think most drivers should start with one. They should pick Uber or they should pick Lyft if you're looking at rideshare services, get the hang of it, and then after a little while, definitely add another service. So, for example, like obviously Uber and Lyft are the 2 biggest rideshare services. I think if you're a rideshare driver, you want to be signed up with both. Even if, for example, like Uber is busier in your city, it's always good to have a backup. You never know when maybe a document expired on your Uber account and you forgot to upload it. Or, for example, maybe the Uber app, it's actually gone down a few times in the past year, and you can have Lyft as a backup. And the nice thing there is that, if the Uber app isn't working well, all those passengers will go over to the Lyft app. So if you're not approved to drive on another app, you can't take advantage of that.
Yeah, that's some really good advice, to always make sure you have a backup in your back pocket in case anything
Definitely.
ever goes wrong. I'm wondering if there are any other tips that you have for making sure that your rideshare business is as profitable as possible.
Yeah, I think that, the big thing that people look at is, we've talked about some strategies to maximize income, but the other side, now that you're running a business, the thing that you have to realize is that income is almost just as important as your expenses, right? So if you're going out and driving in a very fuel efficient car, a 4-door sedan, and you're getting 30, 40, 50 miles per gallon, or you have a hybrid, that's going to be a good rideshare vehicle. And if you're not in that type of vehicle, you just have to understand the expenses that you're putting on your car. And if you're putting 500 or even 1,000 miles a week on your car, you're going to have some expenses pop up. You're going to have some potential tax burdens. You kind of have to think about the profit, but also the other side, your expenses and what you might owe in the future.
Yeah. And I can definitely attest that tracking your expenses helps you lower your taxable income, which means you're going to be paying taxes on a smaller amount of income, which, like you said, will help save you some money in tax time for sure. So a question that we've been getting a lot recently is about rideshare insurance. And I'm wondering if you have an opinion on if it's worth it and if now is a good time to be buying it.
Yeah, so I think that rideshare insurance in general, you have to really understand. A lot of drivers get into this business looking to make a couple $100 a week, but really you're running a business, and you have to understand that there's kind of increased responsibility and liability. And so Uber and Lyft will allow you to sign up with regular personal insurance, but I think that rideshare insurance, at least getting a quote, is almost a must, especially now that there's so many different options in every single state now has almost at least one. Something like California, for example, has like 7 or 8 different companies that you can get a rideshare insurance quote for. We've got a marketplace on our site site where you can select your state, and then it'll tell you all the companies that are available and recommended agents, because definitely you may not be fully protected, and there's definitely some things that rideshare insurance can help with. And honestly, what we find is a lot of people just haven't shopped around for insurance in a while, and so they actually sometimes save money, or it's very minimally more expensive just because they haven't gotten a new quote in a while. So that's definitely something I recommend.
Yeah, and that's great advice. And I'll add that even though I'm sure rideshare insurance may cost you extra every month, it is deductible as a business expense, so you can track it because it is directly related to your business activity. So you might as well deduct it on your taxes and save yourself some money. So we also get a lot of questions about how to make sure that you're maximizing your passenger ratings. So I'm wondering if you have tips on how to make sure that you're getting the best ratings that you can, and what kind of role those ratings play in your business.
Yeah, so I mean, I think ratings can kind of be as complicated as you want it to be. For a lot of drivers, frankly, just being a good driver and providing safe driving and good navigation will get you plenty of 5 stars, and you won't ever have to worry about, falling below a 4.6 and potentially getting deactivated. So what I tell a lot of new drivers is to go out and take a ride as a passenger. You'll learn a lot about the service and how it works.
Thanks for doing that.
Okay.
I
think
you're
our first
that you can get really great ratings without doing a whole lot besides good navigation and good driving. And what other tips did you have on that front?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that, kind of when you think about good driving and navigation, what that means is really just understanding your city, right? So when a passenger gets into your car, obviously you see the destination on their app, but it may take a second or two for the directions to load or the navigation. You don't know if you need to make a left or a right out of the driveway. And so if you understand that your passenger is going to the beach, for example, and you're in Los Angeles, you have to know that the beach is west, or you kind of have to know the general directions. So I would sort of just understand, that GPS and navigation is a tool. It should aid you, but you shouldn't be 100% reliant on it.
Sure. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So I'm wondering if you can comment on what kind of role, what do you think the best practices are for which rides you accept, which ones you cancel, and which ones you decline? What do you think is the best strategy there?
Yeah, so definitely I would say that when it comes to, which rides you should take, I mean, when it's slow out, you don't often have a lot of choice. You kind of want, if you're out driving during times where there's not a ton of requests, you may not have a lot of options there. You might just kind of have to take what you can get. That's a great time to drive for both Uber and Lyft. You can use an app like Maestro that allows you to do it at the same time automatically. But during times where it's busy, I mean, frankly, you actually do have some things you can control. So for example, when it's really busy here in Los Angeles, Saturday night, and you're getting tons of requests, I will only accept requests if they're within 3 to 4 minutes away, because you don't get paid to drive to a passenger, right? So if you can kind of minimize the amount of time and miles that you spend driving to passengers, that's one way that you can kind of boost your earnings. And what I found is that even when it's really busy, you could just how the way the algorithm works, you can still get. It doesn't necessarily mean that you'll get rides only that are close to you. So if you get a ride request that's 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes away when it's really busy, and you know that if you ignore that request, you'll get a closer one, or there's a good chance you'll get a closer one in the future, that's something you can do. Some drivers will ignore Uber Pool because it's a lot more hassle, and you actually get paid less per mile with Uber, at least, to do Uber Pool trips. The only kind of caveat there is if you're on a trip-based bonus like Uber Quest, where you kind of want to rack up a bunch of short trips, then you would want Uber Pool trips, since they count as 2 for, each passenger counts as 1, so it'd be 2 total. So that's definitely some tips you can use.
Yeah, definitely. That's really helpful. So we've hit the end of the questions that I have for you. I'm wondering if is there anything that we didn't ask you that you would love for all the rideshare drivers out there to know, to make sure that they're running their business as efficiently as possible?
Sure. I think that my one piece of advice would be kind of nobody cares more about your business than you do. There are a lot of, obviously Uber and Lyft, want drivers to succeed. And, there are a lot of tools out there that you can use to aid your business. But at the end of the day, no one is going to care as much about the money you make as you, and no one's going to care as much about the vehicle you're driving and the strategies you're using and your expenses as you. So definitely there are a lot of positives to the job, but definitely there is some extra extra work and responsibility, that you get to take advantage of the flexible schedule, for example. But, on the other end, you kind of have to run this like your business, and definitely, make sure you take care of all the small things.
Yeah, that's definitely great advice. I'm sure everybody who's watching appreciates it. Well, Harry, I think that's all we wanted to cover today. Thank you so much for joining us. All of this information is going to be invaluable to our members, so we really appreciate it.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for having me. And I appreciate working through a couple of the technical difficulties, but I think we ended up with all the information we wanted to share. So thanks for having me,
Yes.
Tate and the Stride team, and look forward to doing it again in the future.
Good. And thank you everybody for joining. And if you haven't already, definitely like Stride on Facebook and share this broadcast with all of your rideshare friends so that they can see these tips as well and make sure that they're as prepared as possible before they head out on the road to maximize their profits with their ride sharing business. And if you haven't already liked Stride on Facebook, please do so now. And if you're looking for extra tips on any of the information that we covered today, you can see a recording of this Facebook Live later on. And you can also follow us on Twitter and check out our blog for more in-depth info on anything that we've discussed today.
Cool.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much and have a good one, Harry.